Hi, this is Ann Lemaster, and tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 21, which is water, electrolyte, and acid-base balance. Basically, in this chapter, this is kind of a rehash of the functions of the particularly renal systems, the urinary system, and the respiratory system. And it's kind of a nice overall review. Okay, so balance and equilibrium, kind of the keys to, let's try this one, kind of the keys to the body. But if you remember from the urinary system, for water and electrolytes, electrolytes being ions like sodium, potassium, chloride, you want to take in the same amount you excrete. And so you want to keep that balance stable. And keep in mind, water and electrolyte balance are interdependent. That's referring to water following salt, if you remember from the urinary system, among other things. Now, our bodily fluids aren't universally distributed or uniformly distributed. They occupy different compartments. And again, they're going to work together. Water and electrolyte movements are going to work together to regulate and stabilize their distribution and composition of body fluids. Alrighty. In the human body, you have about 40 liters of water. Two-thirds of that is intracellular. Intracellular meaning in the cell, and 1/3 is extracellular. So that refers to fluids outside of your cells. Typically, a female is 52% water by weight, and a male is 62%. I'll let you draw your own conclusions on that. Speaking as a female. All right. Intracellular fluid, okay. Again, fluid inside the cells, extracellular outside. This includes interstitial fluid, blood plasma, and lymph. Remember, these are all the same fluid, just depends on their location. And then special fluids called transcellular. And they're separated. They're separated by epithelial layers. So this is cerebral spinal fluid. This is the fluid that protects your brain and spinal cord. Aqueous and vitreous humors. These are the fluids that help maintain the eye shape and nourish your eye. And synovial fluid found in your synovial joints. Oh, and serous fluid, which reduces friction in your serous cavities. And with this chart here, let's just look at this chart. In the purple, this is telling you where, in the purple is extracellular, and in the kind of teal, if you will, that's where the intracellular fluid lies, or is. And what this table is showing you is where each ion or each electrolyte is more abundant. So what this table is telling you is that sodium is more abundant in extracellular fluid, whereas potassium is more abundant in intracellular fluid. If you can think about your nervous system with a sodium-potassium pump, pumping sodium out and potassium in. Other ones that we'll be focusing on, calcium and phosphate ions. Those are going to be closely linked. And our friend bicarbonate ion from how carbon dioxide is transported. Okay, so what governs where the fluid is? And again, it is pressure. Fluids are going to be moving from higher pressure to lower pressure. The two main pressures, one is hydrostatic. That's driven by the heartbeat, blood pressure. So this fluid, or this pressure, wants to push fluids out of the cell or out of the vessel. Osmotic pressure is generated by the big proteins within the capillaries. So this is going to push or pull fluids back into the cardiovascular system. Okay. Basically, the main take-home point is that homeostasis, if you remember, that's the nice internal balance our bodies are trying to maintain, requires that we control both our water intake and water output. And how do we do that on a daily basis? We take in about 2.5 milliliters per day. That's roughly equivalent to like a 2-liter bottle of soda, a little bit more than that. 60% of that comes from drinking, 30% comes from moist foods, and 10% is a byproduct of oxidative metabolism. In other words, it's a byproduct of cellular reproduction, or cellular respiration. Reproduction is in a few weeks. And this is what this chart is showing you here, breaking it down. Notice on this chart too, or this table, the amount of output is equal, and we're going to talk about water output in the next slide. Water output, and let me find my mouse. Here we go. Water output can be a variety of things. The most frequent one, or the activity in which you lose the most water, is urination, of course. Feces, about 6%. You also sweat. Evaporation from the skin. Your skin is slightly moister than the environment sometimes. And the lungs during breathing. Again, your lungs are mucus-coated and nice and moist. So as air hit those, you happen to lose some of the moistness. Evaporation from the skin and the lungs is about a 28% loss altogether. So that should add up to about 100%. Now, electrolyte balance, remember, this is closely tied to water balance. Intake from foods, fluids, metabolic reactions yield ions. Electrolyte output, perspiration, feces, and urine. Okay. Usually, the big take-home point, again, it's reiterating what electrolytes are the most important: sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, sulfate, phosphate, bicarbonate, and hydrogen ions. Again, most of these ions are obtained from food. Just by our normal eating and drinking habits, we should be able to obtain the sufficient amount of electrolytes. Sometimes an electrolyte craving or electrolyte deficiency can lead to cravings of salts, for example, among other things. The body can lose electrolytes perspiring during warmer days, in the more strenuous exercise. Some are lost in feces as well. But again, the greatest output of electrolytes is from kidney function and urine output. Okay. The three that our body kind of needs the most, the three electrolytes we're going to focus on the most, and your body has a lot of mechanisms there to maintain their levels, are sodium, potassium, and calcium. And these are important, of course, for the nervous system, the muscular system, and cell membrane permeability. And sodium accounts for 90% of all the positively charged ions in extracellular fluid. Again, thanks to the nervous system. One kind of interesting thing is that whichever way sodium goes, potassium is going to flow in the opposite way. Also, whichever way calcium flows, the ion that's going to flow in the opposite way is phosphate. And I'll demonstrate that more as we, well, in this handy-dandy chart here. So, should you get too much potassium, your adrenal cortex on your adrenal glands is signaled. Aldosterone is secreted. And aldosterone increases the reabsorption of sodium, okay, and increases the secretion of potassium. In other words, sodium ions are conserved, and in the process, you excrete out potassium ions. For calcium ions, as they decrease, the hormone that regulates that is parathyroid. The parathyroid, well, it's one of the hormones. Parathyroid hormone secreted. It causes the intestines to increase calcium reabsorption. It causes the activity of the osteoclasts, the bone reabsorbing cells, to increase. And it also causes the renal tubules to conserve calcium. But in the process, you're going to excrete phosphate ions. Okay. Parathyroid hormone affects the intestine, the bone, skeletal system, and the kidney, or the renal or urinary system. And all these mechanisms will return calcium ion levels to normal. Now I'm coming back to here about when you conserve calcium, you're going to secrete phosphate. So the more phosphate you excrete, that's going to cause you to add more phosphate to the bloodstream, because again, you want to keep phosphate and electrolyte ion levels constant. All right, acid-base balance. Acids, okay, are going to release hydrogen ions. That's the main characteristic of an acid. And anything that can take up a hydrogen ion is a base. It's going to release what's called a hydroxide ion when placed in water. However, what's going to regulate the balance of acid and bases is the amount of hydrogen ions. So, as we'll find out, hydrogen ion concentrations are the ones our bodies regulate mostly, again, because of enzyme-controlled metabolic reactions, and also shifts and distribution of other ions, and they also can help modify hormone reactions. So where do hydrogen ions come from besides ingestion? Well, some foods you eat are acidic, but just breaking down these foods, like the aerobic respiration of glucose, can increase carbonic acid. Anaerobic respiration of glucose can produce lactic acid, particularly in our muscles. Oxidation of fatty acids can release acidic ketone bodies. Oxidation of sulfur-containing amino acids can cause an increase in sulfuric acid. And hydrolysis of phosphates and nucleotides can lead to a buildup of phosphoric acid. And all of that can cause an increase in the hydrogen ions in our environment, our internal environment. The difference between a strong and a weak acid. A strong acid will release more hydrogen ions. A strong acid will release more hydrogen ions. A weak acid will release fewer hydrogen ions. And vice versa, a strong base will release more hydroxide ions. In other words, it will add more hydrogen ions. And a weak base will release fewer hydroxide ions and also gather fewer hydrogen ions. So weak acids and bases will serve as the best buffers. In other words, they don't break down completely, and they're able to absorb more or less hydrogen ions. And a buffer is anything that resists changes in pH. Now, how do we regulate hydrogen ion concentrations or acid bases in our bodies? Well, again, it's very important to maintain acid-base balance. And during normal metabolic reactions, we're generally going to produce more acids than bases. Usually our body uses one of three ways. Acid-base buffering systems. These are the fastest responses. Respiratory excretion of carbon dioxide, so our respiratory system, and renal excretion of hydrogen ions, so our urinary system. So the acid-base buffer systems, the most abundant, one we've hopefully come to know and love, is hydrogen ions plus bicarbonate ion yield a weak acid, carbonic acid, and that can be broken down into hydrogen ions plus bicarbonate. Oh, whoops. Yes, okay, no, whoops. Phosphate buffering system. Hydrogen ion can combine with the monophosphate ion, making dihydrogen phosphate ion, which is slightly acidic, and then that can break down to hydrogen ions and monohydrogen phosphate, which is slightly basic. And the protein buffering system comes from the individual amino acids. NH3 can release hydrogen ions, and COO group can accept a hydrogen ion. And again, these buffering systems are usually made up of strong acids, or weak acids and weak bases. And because they are weak acids and bases, they're able to convert stronger acids into weaker acids and stronger bases into weaker bases. And that's generally how a buffering system works. Again, the point of the buffering system is to keep the pH in balance. Now, the buffering systems I just showed you, this is the quickest way our body regulates acid-base balance. However, physiologically, we can do this with our respiratory system. So if we increase more CO2 via exercise or whatever, CO2 will react to produce, again, carbonic acid, Carbonic acid releases hydrogen ions. That stimulates the respiratory center, and that changes the rate of our breathing to eliminate more CO2. In the renal system, if we have, say, a high intake of proteins, you increase the metabolism of the amino acids, which are the units of protein. You gain more sulfuric and phosphoric acid, so that increases your hydrogen ion concentration in body fluids. So that causes your nephron to increase the concentration of hydrogen ions in the urine, and that leads to the hydrogen ion concentration in your body fluids returning to normal. The first line of defense against pH shift or changes in pH are your chemical buffers. Again, bicarbonate ion buffer, phosphate ion buffer, and protein buffer. The second line of defenses are your physiological buffers, respiratory and the renal system. And I'm going to go down to this part of the slide, down here on the pH scale, and notice that normal pH is between 7.35 and 7.45. So we have a very narrow homeostatic range of pH. So a normal healthy range of pH is very slight. So should our bodies become too acidic, acidosis, our pH will drop, and our survival range is to a pH of about 6.8. Should our bodies become alkaline or basic, our pH will rise, and humans can survive to a pH of about 8. So again, even the survival range is very limited. What can cause acidosis? Acidosis can be caused by a couple things. One, you can accumulate acids metabolically, and you could lose bases. Anyway, that will cause an increase. Anything that causes an increase in hydrogen ions, dropping the pH, causes acidosis. Loss of acids, accumulation of bases, decreases hydrogen ion concentration, causing the pH to rise, alkalosis. Okay, so causes of acidosis can be respiratory or can be metabolic. Respiratory acidosis is caused by a decrease in rate and depth in breathing, either obstruction of air passages or decreased gas exchange. These all lead to accumulation of CO2 and respiratory acidosis. Failure to secrete of your kidneys to secrete acids or excessive metabolic production can lead to an accumulation of non-respiratory acids. Okay, and metabolically that produces acidosis. In addition, anything that causes you to lose basis, like prolonged diarrhea or prolonged vomiting, again, these could lead to metabolic acidosis. Alkalosis, some of the causes, it can be metabolic, but it could also be respiratory. So, should you have anxiety, fever, poisoning, respiratory, anything that causes hyperventilation, you lose excessive amounts of CO2. That decreases the amount of carbonic acid being made. As you increase the amount or decrease the amount of carbonic acid, you also decrease the amount of hydrogen ions, and that leads to respiratory alkalosis. Whoa, okay. Metabolically, which is shown on this slide, or this side of the slide, gastric drainage and vomiting both contain lots of acids, and that can increase alkaline effects, and also metabolic alkalosis. And I believe that is the end of this lecture. Yes, it is. So now I'm going to ask if you have any questions. If not, thanks very much, and I will hopefully chat with you next week.